All right, today I'd like to be going through this particular past paper. This is in fact 2011 May to June, paper 2, CXC examination. Let's begin with section C, which is in fact human systems. All right, this is in fact question number 5. Question number 5A simply shows a particular diagram or a map actually below, and we are seeing two countries, country P as well as country Q. Look carefully on the map for approximately 1 minute. All right, if you take your time if you have to. You will also see a particular scale as well. You will see certain clues on your map. Also, you know the north arrow is actually here, looking at the rainforest, different type of rivers as well, flowing through this particular region. Take 1 minute and look at the actual map itself. So, having done so, let us begin with part 1. Use the evidence from the map. List two features, right, which may be associated with low population densities in country P. All right, so look at country P at the top of the map itself. You are seeing, first and foremost, there are in fact a rainforest. So this particular vegetative structure may be relatively dense, and as a result may hinder or at some point debar, all right, development. With respect to that, we also have a lot of interconnecting. The second point is that we have a lot of interconnecting fluvial channels, or rivers, I should say. All right. As you can see, we have the Cuyuni River, the Mazaruni River. All right. We have the Essequibo River, all the way out in Berbice as well. All right. Being well, traversing across the entire landmass itself. So the interconnecting river channels can also be a factor as well. Now, the second part of the question, name the countries labeled P and Q. Okay, so country P is in fact Guyana, while country Q is Suriname. All right, so part B, with reference to population, define the terms natural increase and also migration. Make sure when you are labeling your questions, when you're writing your exam and stuff like that, you make sure you put your number in, also label your questions properly for me, please. All right, so the first one, what is natural increase? All right. Now, natural increase is in fact a term which is associated with the difference between the birth rates and the death rates, right? And this is in fact associated with population increase, right? In a particular environment, of course. Natural increase does not take into consideration migration concepts. All right, it just takes into consideration birth rates and death rates. That's the reason why it is said to be natural increase. Okay, so the birth rates minus the death rates will actually give you the natural increase. If the birth rates, however, are lower than the death rates, you would actually have a natural decrease. Okay, so natural increase is the difference between birth rate and death rates, where typically the birth rates would in fact be greater than the death rates. All right, let's go through quickly. With respect to migration, migration is in fact a term which refers to the movement, all right, the movement of people from one country or one area to another over a prolonged period of time, right, for the purpose of establishing a new home or a new place of residence. Migration can also be conceptualized into emigration as well as immigration. All right. Part C. Describe the pattern of international migration for a named Caribbean country, right, over the last 20 years. Now, folks, I'd like to be talking about Jamaica. All right. For this particular question, I'd like to focus on Jamaica. All right. In the 90s, right, there was in fact mass movement of people from Jamaica, right, which is in fact out of that particular country to the US, UK, and Canada. Right. They were in fact considered to be US, UK, and Canada are in fact developed nations. Jamaica is still developing. It is in fact a small island developing state still. Yet for better employment opportunities, better standards of living, and also financial stability, there was in fact outward migration, right, which was in fact relatively high, resulting in a brain drain and labor shortage in Jamaica, right? And this in fact sparked immigration of foreign nationals from neighboring like areas like Cuba and also from more distant regions such as also the UK and also the US. Okay, so there was in fact outward migration from Jamaica, but at the same time there were in fact persons coming into the country to fill that gap or to fill that particular void. Now, part D, explain two factors, how two factors influenced rural to urban migration. Now, rural to urban migration is in fact something which is a concept which is associated with people living in the countryside and moving towards the city. Now, first and foremost, the first factor is that better infrastructure and accessibility to services such as education, healthcare, and even recreational activities as well, right, may entice persons to leave the rural area and move towards the urban environment. Secondly, better standards of living with respect to better paying jobs, greater opportunities, and higher salaries associated in comparison to the rural environments, which may essentially be limited in that respect. Part E, explain how four factors have influenced high population densities in a named Caribbean country. Now, folks, for this particular question, I'd like to focus on Trinidad. Yes, Trinidad, all right? Trinidad, if we let's look at the map, if we know for sure, we can just bear in mind that in Trinidad here, the western or the west central part of Trinidad is considered to be much more populated. Right, there's in fact a denser population in the west central part of Trinidad, and the reason for that is because, first and foremost, it is in close proximity to a natural harbor, all right, which is along the Gulf of Paria. The Gulf of Paria is a sheltered body of water. All right, as you can see, it is in fact enclosed in this region here. There's a sheltered body of water, which is relatively calm in that regard. As a result, they have the majority of ports and stuff like that along this particular part of the island. And this is in fact very favorable with respect to businesses, even for shipment of and offloading of materials and whatnot. All right. Now, secondly, we must bear in mind that this centralized region of Trinidad, all right, specifically the west central part of Trinidad, is in fact associated with gentle topography. Once you have a gentle topography, you have a greater lateral spread. Now, if we were to compare the central part of Trinidad, west central part of Trinidad, in comparison to the northern range of Trinidad, the northern range is very steep, all right? And that would, in fact, affect the ease of access. And that will actually bring us to the third point. Accessibility is a significant thing. And the accessibility associated with the centralized region of Trinidad, there are multiple or interconnecting road networks actually, which can simply branch in various directions throughout. And this allows, this is a facility which encourages mobility and whatnot throughout the entirety of that particular region. And accessibility is important because it allows persons to move from one distant area to another, which is extremely important. Let's go through quickly. Now, the fourth point, given the gentle topography of this particular part of the island, we must bear in mind that fertile soils are in fact major characteristics due to the gentle slope. All right, these soils tend to be thicker. Now, in the early days, right, agriculture was in fact a major economic activity, and the settlement simply grew and expanded, right, infrastructurally with time. But agriculture was in fact the major primary economic activity at the time, which actually set the pace for many other things. And that is because of the fertile or the rich soils, which existed in the gentler slopes. All right, so question 6A, take approximately 1 minute. You can pause the screen if you have to and look at this particular table. This is a table 1 showing the contribution of various sectors to gross domestic product or GDP. All right, take that minute for me quickly. Now, folks, we have different countries, A, B, C, D, and E. We have different economic activities. We have primary sector, sectors, primary, secondary, and tertiary. All right, for which country, part 1 now, for which country did primary activities make the smallest contribution to GDP? It is blatantly on the graph. This is actually for 1 mark. You can see country E. All right, very, very simple. Part 2. Which country did secondary activities account for approximately 1/3 of the GDP? Secondary activities is this middle column here, and 1/3 is approximately 23.5%. All right. In that regard, the only country that we can see which is the closest to that is in fact country C. Okay. Part 3. For which countries did secondary and tertiary activities account for 90% of the GDP? For both secondary and tertiary, all right, let us look quickly. All right, accounting for 90%, we are seeing country B. We are seeing 15% for secondary and 75% for tertiary. All right, it actually tantamounts to 90%. Now, how are contributions of primary, secondary, and tertiary activities similar for all countries except E? Now, students, look carefully in the graph. All right, all the countries right? That is except E, which is referring to A, B, C, and even D, all right? You're actually seeing there's a progressive increase in terms of the contributions from primary to secondary to tertiary. However, country E did in fact show the highest contribution was associated with secondary, all right, and it did not follow that particular pattern. All right. All the others, A, B, C, D, and A, B, C, and D, right, showed progressive increases from primary to secondary and tertiary. E did not. Okay. Now, part B now, right, define the term secondary industry and give one example of a secondary industry that you have studied. Now, a secondary industry is one which is associated with the use of a resource or raw materials, right, to create a new product involving packaging, processing, and even manufacturing activities. All right. Example is in fact the garment industry associated with the Dominican Republic. All right. Part 2. State 3 ways in which countries can benefit from the development of secondary industries. First and foremost, students, any country which is involved in secondary industries, first and foremost, is that there is in fact an increase in GDP, primarily because the actual products to which they are manufacturing or producing, they would simply export that, and there will be an increase in GDP earnings for that particular country. Secondly, we have to understand that this will also facilitate the expansion in the employment sector and encourage economic diversification. Thirdly, we could bear in mind that that particular country, all right, would in fact be associated with a significant degree of recognition. The country will be significantly recognized regionally or perhaps even internationally, right, for its development in that regard. Now, thirdly, state 2 economic factors which may influence the location of a secondary economic activity. All right, let's go through quickly. This is actually part 3. Just list it out quickly. We can talk about the location of the raw materials. And that regard, in terms of an economic aspect, I would say the cost of production and the cost of deriving the raw materials or extracting the raw materials. All right. Secondly, I could also take into consideration the transport cost of the raw materials. Okay. Thirdly, explain 3 policies that this is in fact part C. Explain 3 policies that the government may use to promote sustainable development in primary economic activities. All right, the first one is in fact zoning regulations, right? Can in fact be associated with specific areas where resources are in fact extracted, right? Because you do not want to have people just randomly extracting resources at a wild state. All right, this would in fact be a major problem. So zoning regulation is in fact a major concept. Let's take that into consideration. Secondly, there would in fact be environmental impact assessments and also environmental monitoring frequently to determine the extent to which the environment or the ecosystem is in fact affected. Thirdly, the government actually would in fact stipulate or perhaps set certain limitations to the quantity of the said raw materials to in fact be extracted over a significant period of time. All right, because this is a major way where you can monitor. All right. All right. So thirdly, well, not really thirdly, but I should say, well, part D really. All right. Explain 3 challenges faced by one of the following activities in a Caribbean country. They say one of the following activities in the exam. Choose one. Don't choose all. Right. But for the purpose of understanding, we are actually going to go through all 3. Now, students, you will see this particular question repeated multiple times. All right, so this is like what we call a landmark question. So pay very close attention to this. In terms of the actual country, we'll be talking about these in a couple of minutes. All right. The fact of the matter is that in many instances, fishing, forestry, and mining, they all fall within, well, I should say primary economic activities. All right. The country that you are going to talk about, you must bear in mind, you must be a bit specific with respect to it. But at the same time, all right, it must be a country that you are in fact aware of. For example, you can choose your own country. If you're in a Caribbean country, you can choose your own country. For example, I'm from Trinidad. I'm actually going to specifically choose Trinidad. All right, but not only. This doesn't only apply to Trinidad at all, but the challenges exist throughout. Okay, so keep that in mind. Don't let it be difficult. Make it easy for yourself, right? Make sure you understand this properly. All right, let's go through quickly. All right, let us begin with fishing here, right? For question part D, we are going to go through all three. Now, fishing and the country I'm talking about in the Caribbean is in fact Trinidad. All right. Now, first and foremost, there are certain challenges associated with fishing here in Trinidad. Why? Because there are many instances where we heard fishermen actually complaining with respect to the inconsistency associated with their catch, right? Which basically conceptualizes low catch, right? Low fish catch, which is something which is associated with a low degree of economic productivity. Secondly, we could also take into consideration that oil spills and pollution can have a severe negative effect, right, upon the aesthetics and also upon the maneuverability along the coastline or the region the coastal region as well. All right. Thirdly, in Trinidad, there is a major issue with respect to piracy along the Gulf of Paria. Right? For example, there were numerous instances where our local fishermen were, in fact, they had their boats seized. Many of them were, well, I should say, essentially kidnapped, right, and taken to neighboring Venezuela. Right? Many of them were killed, as a matter of fact. It is nothing new. All right. So that is a issue with respect to that. Now, in terms of forestry, all right, the second one with respect to forest that we have here, I will also focus upon Trinidad. A major challenge is that of unexpected or perhaps uncontrollable bushfires, all right, especially in the dry season. In the dry season, it is in fact very arid. All right, the ground is parched, and the slightest, well, all the shrub and the loose dry leaves and stuff like that can simply be fuel for fire. Okay. Apart from that, there is in fact illegal logging, right, which results in losses to the industry, where the registered operators are in fact affected. All right. And thirdly, we should take into consideration illegal squatting, which also involves deforestation for settlement expansion. This is in fact take away from the productivity of the activity of forestry, all right, or for harvesting of wood, all right, or resources from that particular environment. Now, with respect to mining, all right, I'm going to focus on Guyana. All right, Guyana is one of those countries that simply mines for gold, right, as well as many other aggregates and stuff like that. Now, they are in fact this particular mechanism, this activity does in fact this is in fact associated with high energy consumption, all right, which obviously would incur a high cost or high level of expenses. All right. Secondly, we must bear in mind that apart from being very costly, all right, you also may exhaust a lot of machinery, heavy machinery for that matter. All right, and that can take away from the productivity because you can actually incur losses. Okay. Thirdly, in terms of containing the actual sediments or even the materials, right, that can simply be derived from the mining initiatives or the mining activities, all right, there can in fact be a major problem with containing these components. All right. Contaminants can enter the waterways. For example, mercury is in fact a chemical substance that is namely associated with mining of gold for that matter. Okay. All right, let's go through quickly into question 7. The illustration shown below highlights the attempts by the World Trade Organization to regularize trade between nations. The world trade in bananas, right, brought into focus the varying views held on trade by 4 groups. We have South and Central America banana producers, we have the European Union, the World Trade Organization, and also the Caribbean banana producers. Take a minute for me, right? I want you to take a minute. I want you to look at this particular, well, just look at the screen for a minute. Look at A, B, C, and D, all right, as it relates to bananas in the Caribbean. Take 1 minute and look at that for me quickly. All right, you can pause the screen if you have to. All right, let's go down quickly. State which interested party would be most likely to make each of the statements in A, B, C, and D above for 4 marks. All right, so we have here 4 options as we mentioned earlier. For part A, all countries should comply to international trade regulations regardless of historical ties. A would in fact be associated with the World Trade Organization. B, We can only produce on a small scale because of our size. Our economies will be devastated if we are forced to compete with the large producers. Now, class, Caribbean islands are what we call small island developing states, and they have that exact same problem. So D would in fact be associated with Caribbean banana producers. C, our cheaper bananas should be given a chance. It is discriminatory to exclude us by imposing high tariffs. Now, that would in fact be associated with Central and South America, the banana producers. And last but not least, we have D. We will comply with international regulations and increase in tariffs on bananas from our former colonies. D would in fact be associated with the European Unions. Why? They have the purchasing power, they have the expertise, they have the wealth to simply pay higher, right, in terms of their banana production, in terms of the acquisition of this particular resource. Okay. All right. Let's go through quickly. B part one, describe 5 characteristics of commercial arable farming in a Caribbean country you have studied. Now, students, I'm going to focus on Trinidad because this is, or you could focus on Guyana too if you wish. If you wish, it doesn't matter a problem at all. Now, 5 characteristics of commercial arable farming in a Caribbean country. Whether you choose Guyana or you choose Trinidad, it will fall within the same category. Number one, large expanses of land will in fact be associated. All right. In the case of Guyana, students they engage heavily upon of cultivation of sugar. All right, and they require large expanses of land. We in Trinidad, at one point, we had a massive area for sugar production, but Guyana's land space far exceeds that of ours. All right. Now, secondly, we have commercial farming is associated with heavy machinery use, and this is to improve the efficiency, all right, and to reduce the time taken for executing specific tasks, which would in fact take a lot longer if you were engaged upon manual labor. Thirdly, high chemical fertilizer usage is involved because of the fact that you try to treat all crops at any given point in time for pest diseases, preparing them for harvesting and whatnot. You try to treat all of them at a single point in time. Hence, aerial spraying can be involved in certain parts of Guyana. Also, you use inorganic or chemical fertilizers to maximize upon productivity because they are fast acting. Now, the fourth point, I would say monocultural approaches are in fact involved. Monoculture is in fact associated with planting of one particular type of crop at any given point in time. And why is that important, class? Because of the fact that you want to harvest in bulk. Hence the reason why you plant one single crop type over a significant region. So all harvesting can be done at the same time. And last but not least, these efforts, anything with commercial arable farming, is associated with profit-oriented initiatives, and the proceeds, or the produce, I should say, is in fact sold to large markets or even potentially exported. Second point, B part 2. For the country you named in B1 above, state 3 problems other than marketing that affect commercial arable farming. Now, the three, I'm gonna focus on Guyana, right? Like I mentioned earlier, right? With respect to Guyana, Guyana is actually in close proximity, or harbors rather, rainforest or very dense tropical forest. Because of the location of Guyana, the moisture receipts, right, is in fact significantly high. As a result of that, the time of the year is in fact a very important factor as it relates to commercial farming. All right. Time of the year would in fact influence the period through which the wet and the dry season is in fact experienced. Dry seasons are often associated with a greater degree of commercial arable farming or commercial arable activity. All right, because you have the ideal conditions, less waterlogged conditions and whatnot will be associated in the dry season. Hence the reason why the plants would not be subjected to inundation and whatever the case may be. All right, now I realize this is a steady problem, so I'll just kind of make it short. All right. Secondly, Guyana's cultivation is mainly associated with the coastal fringes. It's actually in close proximity to the coast. The reason for that is because the interior of Guyana is heavily forested. All right, and the interior of Guyana, apart from being heavily forested, there is in fact a major issue as it relates to topographical differences and changes. The land is not uniformly stable, or I should say, of a gentle topography. All right, within the heart of the country itself, it is very rugged. All right, and that, or what adds to that is in fact a very dense forest structure as well. Okay, let's go through quickly. I'll also mention the fact that there are large rivers which traverse right throughout this particular country. And that being said, these large rivers, if there is in fact a major rainfall event, flooding can in fact be a major problem. All right, let's go through quickly with part C. All right, explain briefly one reason why the average age of farm workers has increased over the years. Now, students, with the progression of time, right, technology have actually been becoming much more abundant and prolific. All right, we must understand that uh, as a result of that, the increases in mechanization over the years, all right, would in fact require qualified persons to simply operate. And of course, this could only be legally attained at a certain age, all right, like a proper license or whatever. So long ago, we had people working in the fields or perhaps working land, right, using manual machinery. I'm sorry, not manual machinery, but manual tools. But today, mechanization is in fact a factor that we must consider as well. All right, part D. Outline 3 reasons why peasant or small farmers tend to grow a variety of crops. Now, first and foremost, it is for the purpose of survival in terms of the acquisition of food derivatives. Secondly, to maximize upon the land, small land parcels, right? They will try to maximize upon these small land parcels by, in fact, growing a variety of food, right? And it makes sense of planting exactly the same thing, all right? And also multiple items for which is in fact simply produced, right? Can simply be traded or perhaps bartered, all right? And that is a way in which they can simply sustain their form of livelihood. All right, part E, explain 2 ways in which climate influences wheat production on the prairies of Canada. Now, students, let us bear in mind that the prairies of Canada is in fact associated with very fertile soil, Chernozem soil to be exact. In terms of climate, right, we have to understand that there is in fact a brief period, all right, of an estimated 90 to about say 100 days, which exists primarily within the summer months, all right, and that brief window must in fact be associated with cultivation because it is not there for long, right? They have a very relatively short growing season in comparison to the Caribbean region, all right. Apart from that, the warmer temperatures basically within these summer months can essentially range, right, from say 15 to an estimated 23 degrees Celsius, all right, and average rainfall for the year, the majority of which is in fact received in those summer months. So you have a significant amount of moisture receipt averaging approximately 300 to even 500 millimeters per annum, all right, the majority of which is received within that period of time. So that is actually what is able to facilitate the significant degree of vegetative growth in that regard. All right, wheat production is in fact something which is very significant to Canada. All right, they are a major exporter of this particular product and is very influential in terms of the entire world. All right, and they are simply a supplier, all right, an exporter to different countries worldwide, international exporter, of course. All right, so students, that is actually the end of section C, right, for 2011 paper. What I'll do, I don't want to make the video too long. As a matter of fact, you're gonna simply use the bite-sized little piece of information here. Any questions you have, feel free to let me know. You all keep good. Bye.